Hey all, Fluff here, and the other night I made a successful push to Legend using Token Druid live at twitch.tv/Fluff. So I thought it would be useful to make a comprehensive guide on the deck, its different variants, the general strategy, and some tips and tricks I learned along the way. This is that video. Watch it, please. Okay, let's start with why you might want to play this deck. The general idea, as I'm sure you already know, is to flood the board with minions with cards like Whispering Woods and the Forest Aid, and then buff them up with Power of the Wild, Blessing of the Ancients, Savage Roar, to swing for huge amounts of damage. So Token Druid is generally going to be strong when AoE removal is weak. Currently the biggest threat to the deck is Warpath specifically, but Warrior isn't currently too prevalent, so in almost every other matchup it really thrives, with the sole exception of Zul Warlock, which is able to get onto the board just that little bit faster, and it runs Knife Juggler with a bunch of ways to proc it, just absolutely decimates your tokens. HS Replay reports a 30% matchup against it, so don't feel bad if you lose to Zoo Warlock, you just went part of that lucky third today. Alright, so the core of this deck is its token generators and AoE buffs, but one of this archetype's greatest features is its flexibility, as those cards only make up 2/3 of the deck. The remaining 10 slots leaves a lot of room for experimentation and flex slots, tech, and so on. So the first route you might want to go down, and the most popular deck on HS Replay currently, is the spell route, using cards like Keeper Steladris, Archmage Vargoth, along with Wrath, Mark of the Lower, and Crystal Song Portal. This gives the deck access to a lot more value, arguably at the expense of Sunburst, but results in the ability to have a transformative game plan, allowing you to outvalue non-control decks. Agario Noobs on the competitive HS subreddit gets credit for this other interesting list in Treant Token Druid, swapping Mark of the Lower and Wrath for Dendrologist and Force of Nature, resulting in more consistent value but in much smaller bursts. With those choose one cards gone, Steladris doesn't really make much sense, so one Crystallizer comes in as a suitable early drop for the deck that incidentally makes Dreamway Guardians very slightly better. With a small buff to Mulch Muncher coming very soon, this could also make its way into the deck and make the Treant plan the more popular variant. And the last variant I'll feature today could be massively impacted by the upcoming card changes, and that's a Mech Token Druid. Between Mecharoo, Microtech Controller, Whirly Glider, Explodinator, Replicating Menace, and surprisingly even Harvest Golem, there's a good number of mechs that fit right into the Token Druid game plan. I personally have been using Microtech Controller in a non-mech build, just because 3 bodies for 3 mana is pretty good. The release of Snip Snap could prove to be a huge boon to this type of deck, and even Mulch Muncher is technically a mech, so its buff could be impactful if there's some way to fandangle together a Treant/mech hybrid deck. A mech build also benefits from a slightly improved warrior matchup, because Dynomatic is normally such a beating for tokens, but when your deck is full of mechs, you just naturally blank that card. That's the major packages looked at, but while we're on the subject of experimentation, I should mention that Sea Giant, Eccentric Scribe, and War Druid Loti are just some of the cards that by themselves can really change the play of this deck and open it up to a lot of testing. Alright, enough about the builds of the deck. How do we actually play it? Let's get into some of the real nuts and bolts of this deck's mulligans, turn-to-turn play, and win conditions. If you have HS Replay Premium, its matchup-specific mulligan information is one of the most valuable tools you will ever have in Hearthstone. Using it effectively will tell you pretty much exactly what cards you're after in every game. But if you don't have it, here's a general idea. Playing a 1-drop on turn 1 is a huge get for this deck, and in fact it's the only player that gives this deck an above 50% win rate against Zoolock, so Acorn Bearer is pretty much always a snap keep. Aside from that, Whispering Woods is probably the most powerful card in your deck. It comes down fairly early, it's generally harder to deal with the sooner you cast it, so always be looking for that, and Dreamway Guardians is just always a really solid 2-drop, so those are the most ideal 3 cards for your opening hand. Against slower, more controlling decks, you do want your AoE buffs early to get your minions out of clearing range, so look for Blessing of the Ancients, but especially Power of the Wild. Being 1 mana cheaper and more flexible is just very powerful against these decks. Against other board-centric decks, Swipe is a great way to establish or recover board dominance, so do look for that, but finding your early drops is more important, so probably don't keep it if you haven't got anything to play on turns 1 or 2. The biggest tests of skill in this deck are knowing when to trade, when to go face, and when to buff your minions, and generally the best way to know that is to know your role in the matchup. Against aggressive decks like Murloc Shaman, Zoolock and some Hunters, you really want to fight for the board until you can produce a board so much stronger than your opponents that you can afford to go face and allow them to expend their time and resources to trade with your board. Generally that means early trading until your swing turns with Whispering Woods and the Forest Aid followed up with strong buffs, but this can also be achieved by accruing little advantages here and there with good trading until you've got a decently sized board of minions that lived and consolidating those advantages with a good couple of buffs. Mark of the Low's first mode also gives a minion a lot of health and taunt, so it can be a really good way to protect a big board and force your opponent to trade. Against slower, more controlling decks, you want to toe the line between early aggression and not overextending too much. Against Mage, for example, chances are they won't have any strong AoE until turn 7, where they might rip a Flame Strike from some Discover card or Mana Cyclone. So the name of the game is going as wide as possible and buffing as early as is reasonable to either kill them by that point or have your minions backed up with the Soul of the Forest. Big old taunts like Rabble Bouncer and Grave Horror are more likely to be problems in this matchup, but with a wide enough board and a couple of buffs, Savage Roar and Swipe are likely to give you enough damage to burst through them and swing for lethal. In general, you should probably ignore Mountain Giants. They're not very good at clearing your board and are just as difficult to clear as the Grave Horrors that could potentially come out of them. If your opponent does manage to summon 4 Grave Horrors, no worries, you lose that game. Chalk it up for some bad luck, move on. And that's about all the generalized tips I have for you today. If you want to learn more about this deck, I've uploaded a highlight game from my Climb to Legends stream in which I explain the choices I make as I'm making them, or you could watch the entire stream on my second channel, Fully Fluffier. Links to both of those will be in the description below, but apart from that, this is a pretty great deck that I'd recommend picking up. It's versatile, it's powerful, lots of room for experimentation, and you'll learn a lot by playing as well as by watching. I hope this video has helped, and if it has, then please consider throwing it a like or letting me know in the comment section, and as always, consider subscribing if you'd like to see more videos like this. If you'd like to see these decks in action more, follow the stream over at twitch.tv/FoyFluff, where I stream Hearthstone at least 3 times a week and play some other stuff on occasion. Thanks very much for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.